So, welcome to the Advanced Excel PivotTables class provided by the Oak Creek Public Library. My name is Joanne Seward, and I'm the Technical Services Librarian here at the Oak Creek Library, and I teach all of the computer classes. So without further ado, let's just dive in, shall we? So, PivotTables are one of Excel's most powerful features. They allow you to extract significant data to help you see comparisons, patterns, and trends in your data. The data validation feature helps you control what can be entered in your worksheet by creating a drop-down list of items in a cell, restricting the entries, and/or creating custom rules for what can actually be entered. Filtering and pivot charts allow you more control over the data in order to show only the data that is needed. So the objectives, what we're going to focus on specifically in this class, we're going to create a drop-down with data validation and then review how to filter within a regular table. We're going to gain an understanding of pivot tables and then create, analyze data, and format within one. We're going to learn how to filter within a pivot table. And then lastly, we'll create a pivot chart and adjust the data/apply filtering. So that's what we're hoping to cover today. All right, so give me one moment and I'll share my screen with you. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is create a drop-down list with data validation. So creating a drop-down list is a great way to ensure that entries are uniform and do not contain spelling errors. This can be helpful when multiple users are entering data on the same worksheet and you want the options to be limited to a list of items or values that you've already approved. So even here at the Oak Creek Library, we use data validation for our spreadsheets because we have a lot of statistics that we keep. And so we are trying to keep certain things uniform and make sure that they're all spelled correctly, etc. So data validation is definitely a tool that we use on a regular basis with our spreadsheets. So if you want to create a drop-down list, like what we are about to do, what you need to do is actually create the list of options first before you kind of dive into applying it. So what I'm going to do is go to this tab down here at the bottom left corner that says Data Validation and click on there. And you can see I already started this list, so 1 through 16. So the idea is all of these things are going to be there when somebody clicks on a cell. They're going to get a drop-down list and all of these items are going to be in that list. So I'm just going to add a couple more right here. All right, so there we go. So what we're going to do now, we are going to go back to our February 2019 worksheet, which is where we want to apply the data validation. Specifically, we want to go to cell B2. So the idea is this category column, we want people to have to choose from our drop-down list. So I clicked on cell B2. I'm going to go to the data tab up at the top right here. All right. And then I am going to, I always miss it for a second. Here we go, data validation. So in the data tools group, there's data validation. So if I click on there, you can see the validation criteria right now says allow for any value, AKA anyone can type anything in there. Doesn't matter, doesn't have to follow any set of rules, nothing. And that's set for every single cell. So all, however many billions of cells there are in this one worksheet, it's set to any value automatically. So what we want to do is change it. So if I click on this down arrow, now we get options like we have a whole number, a decimal, list, date, time, etc. So there's all these things that you can apply to whatever column or cells that you want. So in this case, we're going to do list. And then now you can see there's a box that says source. If I click on this little arrow, it kind of minimizes the window. I'm going to go to this data validation tab and I'm going to click, hold, and drag and select all of the things that we just typed in right there, for example. Okay, so this means all of these are going to be in that list. So if I click on the arrow again to kind of uncollapse it, and then if I click on OK, so it takes us back to our February 2019 worksheet. And you can see now in cell B2, there's actually this little tiny down arrow. So if I click on this down arrow, now look at that, we have a list. So it starts with administrative, claim compliance / guidance, et cetera, et cetera. And I can scroll down in here and I can see all the other ones, including the ones that I just typed in. Okay. So the idea is then somebody would just click on one of these. Oh yeah, the category is projects. Oops, or RA flash. and there it is, okay? If they made a mistake, they could just click on the arrow again and then choose the one they meant. Here we go, projects, ta-da, okay? So the thing that we have to do now is actually apply this to all the rest of these cells, because if I click on cell B3, notice there's no tiny down arrow to the right of it. I go down, no tiny down arrow to the right of it. So the easiest way, rather than having to do data validation and select it all over again, is to actually click back on cell B2 and then use the copy cursor. So at this bottom right corner, there's this little green square. I know it's super tiny, but if you put your mouse on it and click, hold, and drag it all the way down to the last row that you got. So for us, that's 124. And then let go. All right. So in this case, because I put text in there, it applied projects to the entire thing. So maybe I don't want to do that. So I'm going to do undo. And I'm going to do undo again. Okay, so I'm going to leave it empty because otherwise it'll fill in projects the entire way down, which is not what I want. So let's do this again. Bottom right corner, click, hold, and drag all the way down. There we go. Okay, so now you can see these are all empty. But the difference is if I click on one of these cells, now there's a down arrow. Oops. And so now I can select anything from these cells right here. Okay. I can click on this cell, there's a down arrow, and so on and so forth. Okay. So that's how to apply data validation to all of your cells. All right, so the only thing to kind of point out with data validation is you might want to test it before you kind of just put it out there in the wild, so to speak, aka send it to somebody else. So I'm going to type in the word test. As soon as it pops up, there we go. And once I press enter, this little box popped up saying that this value doesn't match the data validation restrictions defined for this cell. AKA if somebody typed in whatever they wanted, it would not allow them. So we'd have to do cancel, and then we have to click on the down arrow and choose the one that we actually needed. As you'll see in a second, though, the one issue with the data validation is if somebody types in there, it won't accept it. However, if you copy and paste from some other cell and put it into that cell, it will accept that. And we'll see that in a little bit when we put data into the rest of these cells. Okay, but I just want to point that out as one of the kind of flaws of data validation that I've noticed is that you can copy and paste things into there that don't fit within that criteria. So just want to point that out. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we are going to review how to filter within a table. So this is a standard table right here, and you can kind of tell the main way that you know that this is a table is this top row right here. All of these have down arrows. And if I click on them, it gives me all of these choices like sorting, I can filter them, and then I can kind of limit what I want to see in these columns and rows, etc. So that is a table in a nutshell, basically. So what we're going to do, let's start with region requesting info. And let's say I want to limit it to just things that are the US. I don't want to see any other regions. So if I click on the down arrow, I can see a list of all of the things that are in the cells, in this case, column E. So I'm going to click on the check mark, select Alt so that they're unselected, and then click on the check mark next to US. So that's the only one that's actually going to be displaying. So if I click OK, now you can see what used to be just a little down arrow has this little funnel symbol. That's how you know that something has been filtered. Okay? And you can tell because every single thing in here is US. The other way that you can tell that things have been filtered, if you look on the left-hand side, notice how number 1 is kind of gray, but then it jumps to 5, 6, 7, etc., and they're all blue. So it's letting you know, these are kind of visual cues, that there is stuff, additional things that you're basically not seeing. AKA, in this case, we're not seeing rows 2, 3, 4, or 8 and 9, or 14, and so on and so forth. Okay, so we know that it worked correctly. So now let's do an additional filter on top of that. So let's say we want to filter the amount of time spent. So if I click on the down arrow again, and this time I'm going to do the number filters, and specifically I'm going to choose less than. All right, and so this box pops up and it gives us an option. So I can do is less than, and let's say I want to do 1. So anything less than 1 is what I want to actually display. So if I click OK, there it is. So we have half an hour, 0.75 hours, et cetera, but all still within the US. So you can see they're all listed there. Okay. And once again, there's this little funnel symbol so that we know that that is filtered. Okay. All right, so to clear a filter or to clear all of the filters, you can go to the top of the column heading again, and you can do this clear filter option. But the quickest and easiest way is in the home tab right here under sort and filter in the editing group. If you choose clear, it gets rid of any filtering that's applied in any column. So anywhere in this table, if there was multiple filtering options applied, it would remove those. The one thing though that I want to point out to be careful about is in this editing group, there's also clear right here. Clear, as it says, will delete everything in the cell or just remove the formatting, etc. That's not what we want in this case. So make sure you go to sort and filter and then choose the clear from here, okay? I'm also pointing that out because sometimes if you have a spreadsheet that you're using amongst multiple people, sometimes the person who used it last and saved it might not actually have removed any of the filters that they used. So maybe they filtered it because they wanted to see specific data, but then they forgot to remove those filters. So I've definitely been on the receiving side of that, where I've opened a worksheet and I'm like, hey, where's all of my data? And I started to freak out, and then I realized, oh, it's because whoever used this last filtered it. So you might want to, if you know it's a table and multiple people are using it, you might want to just go to this sort and filter and choose clear right off the bat, just to make sure that you have all of the data right in front of you to work with, and then you can work on filtering it and limiting it, etc. Okay. So that was a review on how to filter. So give me a second. I'm going to stop the screen. And here I am again. Okay. So we are now getting into the pivot tables section of the class. So what are pivot tables? There are, a pivot table is a statistical table that summarizes data of a more extensive table, for example, from a database or a spreadsheet. So pivot tables, you probably don't want to do a pivot table from a regular table that's only like 10 rows and 10 columns. I mean, it's such a small amount of data that you can basically see everything that you need to see just by looking at it. But pivot tables are really useful when there's large amounts of data. So, you know, 5,000 rows and 100 columns, or etc. Okay, because then it allows you to filter that data to be able to see it more clearly, essentially. Basically what it boils down to is pivot tables allow you to arrange and rearrange, aka pivot, that's where it comes from, statistics in order to draw attention to useful information. So what are they used for? While tables can contain a lot of data, it can be difficult to get summarized information from them. A pivot table can quickly summarize the data and highlight the pertinent information. So the first question that you need to really ask is, what am I looking for from this data? What information am I really trying to find and really trying to highlight? So imagine that you are in a work setting and you need to submit some statistical information to your boss or board or etc. So rather than just giving them all of the raw data and expecting them to understand all of that and really be able to comprehend the meaning of what all of that means, taking that data and then creating a pivot table is really useful because it narrows down their focus so they can see exactly what data you want them to see, essentially. It's not, you know, hiding information, etc. It's just anything that's extraneous at that point. It's, you know, something that they don't need to see, essentially. So, all right. So what data is required? Because they're not created automatically. You have to tell it, what fields you want, and then what, what you want in rows, what you want in columns, what you want to be filtered, etc. So you have to give all of that different data. So there are report filters, which are used to apply to a filter within an entire table. There are column labels, are used to apply a filter to one or more columns to be shown in the pivot table. Row labels are basically the same thing as column labels, just rows. And then we also have summation values. So you can set like a numerical value for your data. So to do like different types of calculations. So you can do sum, average, count, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you'll see in a second when we get into all of this. So, okay. All right. So what we're going to do, I'm going to share my screen again with you. Just give me a moment. In order to create a pivot table, we're going to use this February 2019 worksheet still. However, it would probably be good if we filled in all of the stuff that's empty right now. So rather than clicking and filling it all in myself, I already put it elsewhere. So up here in this address box, if you didn't know, you can type in whatever address of a cell. So in this case, I know my stuff that I typed in starts in Z2, and press enter, and it will automatically take you to that cell. So if you didn't know, that address box is super helpful in that way. So I'm going to use all of this and just copy and paste it into the column that's empty currently. So I'm just going to click, hold, and drag. And then if I do Control X, that will cut it. So you can see that's why the little lines pop up. All right, and so now if I go back to B2, press enter. There we go, and I'm in cell B2, and now if I do Control V, that will paste it into there, okay? So rather than, once again, having to type it every single one of these in or select them all from our data validation list, I just copied and pasted it to save time. So, all right, so now that we have all of the data in here, now we are gonna create our pivot table. So you wanna make sure that you're clicked on one of the cells in the table, doesn't matter which one, just any one of these cells. You're going to go to the Insert tab up at the top left-hand corner. And in the Tables group right here, I'm going to click on Pivot Table. So it gives you a couple options. The first thing is where you are selecting your table or range. In this case, we were already on the table that we wanted, this February 19, and so we don't have to mess around with it. You can choose an external data source, but that's something that is not in Excel, and that's a whole other, bundle of wax, whatever you want to call it. So, and then the last two pieces, we have choose where you want to put the pivot table report to be placed. So you can do a new worksheet, or you can do an existing worksheet. So you can just put it like next to the data, like over here on the right. We're going to leave it as a new worksheet just so that it's really clear and distinct from each other. And then lastly, you can also analyze multiple tables at the same time. So that's kind of what this option down here is. But we're not going to get into that piece of it right now. So everything is set the way that I want it. So I'm going to click OK. And there's our pivot table, except not. So notice how this thing is entirely blank right here. This is kind of what I was talking about before, where you have to tell it what data you actually want it to display. Okay. So what we're going to do is let's just do kind of a base one. So over here on the right hand side in the pivot table fields navigation pane, here is a list of all of our fields: date, category, time spent, department, etc. And if I go back down to the February 2019, notice date, category, time spent, department, etc., etc. So it just took all of these column headings and smushed them right there for us. So we can just choose which ones we want to actually display. So let's say that we wanted to do region requesting info, and we want to move it down to rows. All right, so there we go. So now we actually have a bit of a pivot table. It's a little baby pivot table, but nonetheless, there it is. So let's add a little bit more to it. Let's do the time spent hours, and we're going to move it to this values down here. So notice right away that it changes to sum. So if you click on this down arrow and go to the value field settings, you can choose what type of calculation. So if sum isn't actually what you wanted, let's say you wanted the count or the average amount of time spent or the max or the min, etc., you can choose it from this list. In this case, we want some. We want to see the total hours spent in these different regions. So we're just going to go ahead and click OK and leave it how it is. But you might want to look at this whenever you put something in values, just to double check that it is the way that you want it to be, essentially. Okay. So with pivot tables, it's a lot of just messing around and just kind of seeing how things look when you put it elsewhere. So like, let's say I put region requesting info into columns instead. All right, that's what it would look like. And you can see that's kind of a little bit weird. I don't know, we as humans, you know, that's just maybe how our brains work, that we don't, you know, that it seems like, why use this if it's only one row of information? So it seems, you know, like it makes more sense to be in rows like this going down. But do you have to have it in rows? Do you have to have it in columns? No. That's the whole point of a pivot table, is you can manipulate that data and put it however, or organize it however you want, essentially. That's the nice thing. All right, so what we're gonna do now is we're gonna format our pivot table a little bit. So I'm gonna go to cell A3 right here where it says row labels and click on this down arrow. And here are all of our options, just like the options that we had previously in a regular table. So let's say that I wanted to sort this. If I choose sort A to Z or sort Z to A, it'll only sort in this column right here, okay? But in this case, I actually want to sort it by this column, the sum of time. So what you have to do is choose more sort options. So you have manual is what it's set to right now, aka I could click, hold, and drag, and I can move it into whatever order I want. Or in this case, let's say I want to do descending, Z to A. So right now it's set to region requesting info because that's that very first column. But like I mentioned, I actually want this column. So if I click on the down arrow, now it's going to give me additional choices. So I can click on sum of time spent hours and then click OK. And there it is. So the US spent 127.25 hours cumulatively on all of these different things. And Germany only spent 0.5 hours. There you go. Okay. All right. So next, I'm just going to point out another kind of main difference between a table and a pivot table. So if you look at the data that we have right here, so we have the US and the sum of time that we spent is 127.25 hours. If I wanted to get the same data from our original table, if I go down to February 2019, I'd have to filter it so that I'm only seeing the US, like we did before. And then I would go down underneath this time spent hours column and go to the very bottom. And then I would have to do auto sum, and there it is, 127.25, okay? So now I have that data. So let's say now I also want DK. So if I click on region requesting info, I have to uncheck US, click on DK, click OK, and then now it has the total down here. So if I wanted to do all of this, if I wanted to see all of this information, you can see how many different steps it would be. I'd have to go to the specific region, uncheck the other one, and click OK. Go again, click on the... You can see that it's just a lot of like back and forth. Whereas with our pivot table, it just gives us all of that information and summarizes it just so quickly right here. Okay. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we are going to filter within our pivot table. So right now we're just kind of sorting it. Okay. So in order to filter it, one way that we can do it is over here on this right-hand side, there is this little filter field. So a logical thing to filter it by, in this case, would be actually the date right here. So I'm going to click, hold, and drag that down to filters and let go. And now you can see in row 1, we actually have date, and now it says all. Okay, so this spot right here, this row 1, is always reserved for the filter. Row 3 is where the pivot table always typically starts. Okay, so let's say that I wanted to limit it to just one date. So if I click on the down arrow next to all and B1, and let's say I wanted to do February 15th. If I scroll down, click on 15 Feb, come on, and then click OK. There we go. So now you can see the US did 4, DK did 3, et cetera, for a grand total of 8.75 hours that all of the categories or all of the regions spent on February 15th. So it's very easy to very quickly change this. I can go back on here and click on the down arrow again. And let's say I want to go back to all. So if I click on all and click OK, now I have all of the hours for all of the different dates. So now what I'm going to do is add a different field in here. So let's say I wanted to add category to see exactly what these hours were spent on. So I'm going to click, hold, and drag category down to the rows. Oops, I'm sorry, down to columns. There we go. Okay. So you can see now it breaks it out and you can see exactly, oh, okay, the US spent a total of 15.5 hours on administrative and 1.75 hours on claim compliance / guidance, et cetera, et cetera. Just to show you what it looks like, I'm going to change this category and move it down to rows like I was going to accidentally do before. All right, so you can see the difference. So it has the region and then underneath it, the different categories. Notice how if I flip-flop these, let's say I do region requesting info after a category. So now we have the category and then it's broken down by each region. So claim compliance / guidance, the first one's US and then DK because they're the only two that actually did this category, okay? I'm gonna change it back to the way that I had it. There we go. So it's all about how you want the data to look, essentially, okay? All right, so the next thing that we're gonna do, let's go and filter it a little bit more. So I'm gonna go to cell B3 and click on the down arrow, and I'm gonna limit it. Let's say I only want regulatory comments in here. So if I click on this check mark, if I select all, see how it removes all of them. And I'm just gonna click on the check mark next to regulatory comments and then click OK. And there it is. So I'm only seeing the regulatory comments. Let's say we want to limit this even further. So if I go to A4 this time, and let's say that I only want to see the regulatory comments for Germany and Spain. So if I click on this check mark again to unselect everything, and then I choose Germany and Spain and click OK, there we go. So for regulatory comments for all of the dates, they only spent half an hour each for a grand total of 1 hour. There you go. Okay. All right. Another thing to point out at this point is another great useful feature is we can mess around with this as much as we want. We can flip around the different fields. We can add different filters. We can change the values. We can do all of this. And the nice thing is it doesn't affect your original data whatsoever. So you can mess around with this however much you want, and this will stay the way that it is. So that's kind of nice to know that you're not, accidentally deleting something or removing data or etc. I will point out though that if you do change something, like let me just clear all the filters and remove this sum right here. Remove this additional comment or row. Okay. So let's say that we changed some of the time spent. So we went back after the fact. So after we already created our pivot table, we changed the time in here. So let's say where this one is 1 and this one is 2 and that one is 3.5. Great. Okay. So the thing is now what you have to do here is you actually have to basically refresh the data. So if I go to this Analyze tab right here, and in the data group, I'm going to click on Refresh. Nothing changed right here because that isn't the specific data that's showing is what I just changed. But if we had all of the data showing, then you'd be able to see the change at that time. So, okay. Alrighty. So now what we're going to do is we're going to work on a table, a much larger table, and then create a pivot table from that larger table. So that is this reference raw data worksheet. I'm going to click on there. Okay, to give you a little background before we get into this, I'm going to go to this screen right here. Alrighty. Okay, so what we're looking at right now, just to give you a little background, this is called Gimlet. A lot of libraries use this, including the Oak Creek Library, to keep track statistics of things that we get asked during the day. So anytime that you come up to our desk or call us or email us or send us a question through Facebook, we keep track of it. So, you know, if you ask for a pen, we keep track of it. If you ask where the bathroom is, we keep track of that. If you ask for, you know, a certain book on a certain topic, we keep track of that. If you need help with County Cat, we keep track of that. So we keep track of all of these statistics so that at the end of the year, we can compile all of it and then give it to the library board to say, hey, look, you know, we got asked 4,000 questions within 1 month. Basically, you know, we're still needed. We're still relevant. So that's what we're trying to prove, I guess, is by having this here. So you can see it's broken up into these different categories. So we have type. So if somebody asks about like programs, if they ask where the bathroom is, if there's a specific reference question, like they're looking for books on Germany, et cetera, et cetera. There's duration, how long the interaction took. If the question was asked by a patron, by a staff member, other being like a delivery, you know, man, I don't know, whoever. We have formats, there's locations. So if I'm working at the adult reference desk, I would make sure that this one is selected. You can put in what question that somebody actually asked you, what the answer was. And then we also have tags. So some of these are the examples of tags like book and craft info, children's graphic novels, County Cat, holds, etc. Okay, and you can see here's kind of a list of all of the most kind of recent ones that we have dealt with. Okay, alrighty. So the reason that I'm showing you that is at the end of the year, the library director will get all of this data dumped into an Excel file, specifically this referenced raw data sheet. So you can see this is every single interaction. I think this was from the year 2018. And if I go all the way down, there's 36,589 questions that we got. So you can see this is a huge worksheet, huge. So if we're trying to boil it down to just like, you know, we want to know how many questions the circulation desk had on a certain date. It would take a lot of manipulating in this table to kind of limit those things down, okay? So this is a perfect example of when you want to use an actual pivot table. So I'm going to go ahead and create a pivot table from this. So I'm going to click on any cell again in here. So I just clicked on this cell, for example. I'm going to go to the Insert tab again and choose Pivot Table. Everything is set to the way that I wanted. I knew I wanted a new worksheet, etc. So I click OK. All right, so let's say that I want to filter it. I know that I want to filter it by month. So I can see, you know, specifically like something, all the questions in January, and then all the questions in February, and so on and so forth. The columns, let's do question type. There we go. So circulation related, computer assistance, blah, 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 blah. The rows, let's do location. So there are the different desks, okay? And then let's also do the duration. I'm gonna put it underneath there. So the adult reference desk, any interactions that were 0 to 5 minutes and 5+ minutes, and then the children's reference desk, et cetera, et cetera. So now we're gonna do the number of questions as our sum right here for the values. And it's set to sum, so that's the way that we want it, perfect. Let me minimize this a little bit so that you can see it a little bit better. Too much, there we go, okay. So you can see now it's broken it down into all these different categories. So for circulation related questions, the adult reference desk had a total of 2,571. Children's had 788, and the circulation desk had 6,346, which makes sense. That's what they do. And for a grand total of 9,705. So you can see all of that data is very succinctly put right there for us without having to kind of slog through all of this, okay? All right, let's mess around with it a little bit more. Let's say I want to filter it just to see the month of January. So up here in the filter section, I'm going to go to cell B1 and I'm going to change it instead of all to just January. So if I click on January and click, it keeps going away. Come on. And then click OK. There we go. All right, so now you can see the numbers have all changed. So in January, there was only a total of 746 circulation related questions. Let's say I want to do multiple months. If I go back onto B1 and click on the down arrow again, if I choose this select multiple items, now notice how all of these have check marks. So let's say I wanted just like the first quarter, January, February, March, let's say, and click OK. And once again, the numbers have changed. So circulation related now is 2,718 because this was for the first 3 months of the year. These were the questions that were asked. Okay. All right, let's mess around with it just a little bit more. Let's say we want to filter it so that we're only seeing specific column labels. So in this case, we don't want all of these. We only are interested in reference right now. So I'm going to click on this check mark and click on reference and then click OK. There we go. So it's getting rid of all of that extraneous data that I don't really need to see at the moment. I just need to see this, the reference data. That's it. Okay. So let's unfilter the months. So I'm going to click on all so that I'm back to seeing everything for all of the months, so for the entire year. And let's just mess around a little bit with the duration and the question type. So if I swap these, duration over here, so notice what it just did. And if I move question type underneath location, there we go. All right. And let me clear this filter as well. I forgot that I had this in here. Oops. No, isn't it? Okay, let's do clear filters. There we go. Okay. All right. So now we can see it's kind of just laid out in a different way. So here is the adult reference desk and all the different categories of the question types. And then here is the duration. So 0 to 5 minutes is this column and 5+ minutes is this column. Okay. So you can really see the different kind of ways that you can manipulate this data and break it down. Alrighty. So now what we're going to do is create a pivot chart. So sometimes it's really hard to see the big picture when your raw data hasn't been summarized. Your first instinct might be to create a pivot table, but not everybody is that good at looking at numbers and really interpreting what they mean. So sometimes having an actual graphic representation of those numbers is really advantageous. So, and it's kind of nice to be able to manipulate the data how you want. And then let's say you printed out the different charts that you created from that. And then that way you can just hand those charts to whoever you're reporting to, your director, your library, the board, whatever it is, your supervisor, etc. So let's mess around with it and you'll get an idea of what I'm talking about better. So we're going to click on one of the cells in this pivot table. We're going to go back to the insert tab again. And then in here we have the charts group right here. And you can see we have an option that says specifically pivot charts. I'm going to click on that guy right there. And we have all these different types: line, pie, bar, area, blah, 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 blah. So for right now, just to make it simple, we're going to stick with the column, kind of the most basic chart that you're going to see. And also we're going to stick with this clustered column. We have different types of columns that you can choose from. There's 3D columns, all this fancy stuff, but I'm going to go with the most basic and kind of therefore the most straightforward, which is this clustered column. So if I click on OK, now it's inserted my chart right in the middle of my worksheet. If I click, hold, and drag, I can move it off to the side, so then that way you can see everything a little bit better. Okay. All right, so now we're going to adjust the data that we're actually seeing in our pivot chart. The other nice thing about the pivot chart is I can adjust the data here in the pivot table. I can adjust the data here in the actual pivot chart itself, like see like location, I could limit it, question type, I can limit it, et cetera, et cetera. And I can do it over here in the pivot chart fields. So we're just going to kind of mess around with these couple different areas so that you can get an idea of what I'm talking about. So let's start with the pivot chart right here. So I'm going to change question type, and I want to limit it to just circulation related. So I'm going to click on this check mark next to select all, and I'm going to click on the little box, next to circulation related, and click OK. Give it a second, and there you go. And you can see all of the numbers and everything has changed over here on the left-hand side in the actual pivot table itself, and as well as in the pivot chart. There we go. Okay. All right. So the next thing that we're going to do, we're going to clear all of our filters just to get back to kind of our main way that it was before we started messing with it. So I'm going to click on this clear, and make sure you don't do clear all, because that's going to clear all of your data, etc. You don't want to do that. So we're going to do clear filters, and it goes back to the way that we had it previously. So what we're going to do now is let's mess around with over here on the right hand side. We're going to get rid of question type. So I'm just going to click on this little check mark. So right now question type is in our rows right here. See, rows, there we go. So if I click on the question type to uncheck it, there we go. So it's gotten rid of it. So basically I just boiled it down to how many questions did we get at each desk that were 0 to 5 minutes and 5+ minutes. And then here our pivot chart now represents just that data. Let's say I want to limit it even further and I want to see just the 5+ minutes. So if I go to cell B3 here, the column labels, and if I uncheck the 0 to 5 minutes, so I only want to see 5+ minutes is basically what I'm telling you right now. If I click OK, and there we go, our chart has changed once again. So it's only showing us any interactions that we had that were 5+ minutes for the entire year at the adult reference desk, the children's reference desk, and the circulation desk. So you can see it all right there, easily summed up. Okay. All right, so let me go back to this. And here I am again. Okay, so that is basically kind of the basics and etc. of pivot tables and pivot charts. So I hope you learned a little bit from this class today. You know, it's always nice to have a couple of extra tools in your tool belt, so to speak. So if you have any questions, feel free to email the library. Our email address is library@oakcreekwi.org, and I will see that email and I will try to respond to the best of my abilities. So that's it. Have a great day. Bye.